As someone who's admittedly an AR guy and takes no pleasure at all at pointing out the shortcomings of the AK platform, Century Arms has apparently arrived to shut me up. Their collaboration with SharpsBros aims to make an AK for AR guys and bridge the gap between being both reliable and accurate while allowing for modern force multiplying attachments. Let's take a look at the Century Arms MB47.
This video is brought to you by Vortex. We've been running their new Defender line of red dots hard since before launch. They found a home on all of our guns, whether for concealment, competition, or anything in between. They're rugged, packed with features, and they flat out perform. With the CCW, ST, and XL, there's a dot for you. And let's not forget their no questions asked VIP warranty that covers just about anything.
Starting at the muzzle, we have a pretty aggressive chevron compensator, which is spun onto a 5/8 by 24 threaded muzzle. The compensator does a pretty decent job of keeping the rifle from moving around too much without having a horrible flash, but more importantly, it comes in a thread pitch that's common for most 30 cal muzzle devices / suppressors here in the States. This is a huge step up from the slant brakes more common on examples like our M70, and is much more accessory friendly for us soft-handed AR guys. The barrel is nicely fluted and chrome lined with a 1 in 10 twist rate, which is common for 7.62 by 39 barrels. I think the matte finish phosphate is adequate for a hard use rifle, but I'm slowly becoming more of a fan of nitride finishes. The 4150 steel they elected to use should do wonders for accuracy, and I feel that this is a well thought out barrel for this rifle. The barrel is surrounded by a US Palm free float M-LOK rail that has a generous amount of N-LOK slots at the 3 through 9 o'clock positions. There is a bit of flex in the lower rail due to the nature of how it's mounted to the front of the receiver, but it does indeed prevent you from acting on the barrel when pushing on a light or if you've attached a sling to it. At the 12 o'clock position, you have a trusty Ultimac gas tube and integrated pick rail section. This has been a trusted way to mount red dots and prism sights for a while on AKs, and it's nice to see this feature set from the factory. Like all AKs, this will get hot upon mag dumping into trash, so plan accordingly. At the core of this rifle is where the magic starts to happen. The one-piece milled Sharps receiver eliminated the need for traditional rivets and trunnions typical on AK pattern rifles. And the one-piece design is likely tougher than traditional AKs and will likely make working on them down the road much less cumbersome if they're used at a duty capacity. This rigidity comes with a naked weight of 8.4 pounds compared to the M77.9, but I think this is a feature that both AK and AR guys can come to appreciate about this rifle. This receiver continues to win points in my book due to both the enhanced magazine well and extended magazine latch. Both myself and the Humble Marksman, who was nice enough to let us shoot his rifle for this review, had a way easier time loading the MB47 than the M70, even with a decent amount of tries during one of our outings with this rifle. The mil-spec AR buffer tube, AKM style side optic rail, and QD mounting points on the back of the receiver places the Sharps receiver leagues ahead of other AKs that rely on the more traditional front and rear trunnion system, in my less than humble opinion. Another feature that everyone should be excited about is the Rack 1 flat face trigger included in the MB47. This is by far the best AK trigger I've ever pulled, and even if you aren't interested in this rifle, you should get this trigger for your AK. It has a well-defined wall and a clean break that pulls at around 5 pounds, and if you Google it, you'll be very happy about the price. The last thing I'll brag about from a design standpoint is where the buffer tube extension comes out from the rear receiver. Because of how high it sits, it actually places the bore axis below where the stock lands on your shoulder. Between this, the weight, and the muzzle brake, this was an even flatter shooting gun than our tricked out M70 when shot side by side. Now allegedly, this gun is possibly capable of close to 1 MOA in ideal conditions, so we plan to see how close we can get to that and how much we might set the debate on fire if it lives up to that. And afterwards, the Humble Marksman will join us and we'll give our collective thoughts subjectively about this rifle. We are at the range with the MB47 trying to check the claim of close to 1 MOA. We do have this set up in a very odd setup with a 5-25 scope. Shout out to Vortex. On a bipod in an indoor range, and then we will be checking standard deviation on our Garmin thing just so we can be fair because the ammunition selection isn't matched, but it's at least brass. We're going to be doing it with this. With both rifles, we'll be using the M70 as a comparison. That's 10 shots.
There's Josh's. And also Josh's. I may have pulled 3 perfectly, I don't know, but it's about 4 away from here to here.
M70, exact same optic, exact same shooter, exact same range, exact same ammunition, and we have a shotgun pattern at 100 yards, which is pretty typical. This is actually, I would consider acceptable for an AK. It's just like what, 1, 2, 3, 6.5 MOA, where we were at like probably sub 4. Even if I tried to pick any 3 of these, where if I picked out 3 from my last group, I could almost get 1.5 MOA. With the other one, you're looking at probably 3 MOA at the smallest that you're probably getting. Would match do it better? Yes. All things being considered and having a similar standard deviation, this is a very, clearly there's elevation issues, and even if I pulled some, there's a lot of, like, they're stringing in both directions, which is weird.
5 minutes later.
To make things more interesting, Bobby, in an attempt to show me as an inadequate marksman, did provide us with a 10-round group here, which is still, though it's still about the same width left to right, the elevation deviation was not nearly as bad. So you end up having like probably what, maybe 4 MOA wide, but only about 3 tall. These are both, even with my way bigger group, we're still talking about probably hand size, but this is closer to fist size. At 100 yards for an AK that's not free floated or anything, at a 10-round group with Winchester white box. The M70 is showing why people like it. That's interesting. That makes for a compelling discussion.
As somebody on the spectrum, I like trains, and AKs remind me of trains.
AK Facts with Bobby.
Anyways, yeah, the MB47. We're going to talk about the features. Kind of, we've already kind of covered it on the more scripted portion of this, but how to actually shot was actually, I would say it's more surprising than I would have assumed getting it out of the box. I have positive things to say about this, which is rare for me in AKs. We did compare it to the M70. We both did that in accuracy. Bobby and I went out and took it out to 100 yards, where David and I bravely tried to run drills with AKs as a handgun guy and a mostly AR guy, and it went about as well as you've probably already seen. I think strictly from a shootability standpoint, I think weight, trigger, and muzzle device are probably the biggest things with that. Specifically transitioning to targets and then having to stay on a target. These were like 12-inch steel plates. We're probably like 40, 50 yards so we don't hurt ourselves. But it danced a lot with the M70. I didn't appreciate it until I shot this, because we shot the M70. This was probably almost a year ago now. And I remember having no complaints about it and thinking, that's a heavy gun.
Except the trigger. I wasn't a fan of the trigger at the M70.
But this, like, really, when you tried to get one, I'm trying to shoot faster because you're there. And two, the trigger lets you run a lot faster on the M70 than you could see. This, I felt like I struggled to keep up with how fast the gun could be.
To me, the issue going back to back with the M70 is you did kind of have to drive the M70 back to target a little bit because it jumped more. And this, you really didn't have to. So my problem was the reverse. Is like we shot the M70 first, and I ended up overdriving the gun and ended up dropping shots low because I was trying to return it like the M70, and you don't have to. Like, you can just sit there and hold the thing and it'll do what it does, and it shoots great. This does not punish your shoulder. That was something I noticed about it real quick, is like AKs usually are kind of like a novelty to me. It's like, okay, that was a mag, let's just put it away now and we'll go back to shooting whatever else. This, you could actually sit there all day and plink or, be serious with, and it's just a much more pleasant rifle to shoot than any other AK I've shot.
I think it's a combination of like the receiver, but as well as like, I'm sure this compensator is doing a bit as well to help drive it down. But it's definitely heavier than like a standard like stamped like receiver AK. And I think that definitely aids in it not being, super jumpy. To me, I did like it more than my own Egyptian Matty, but also this is more modernized, much tighter tolerances, it feels like. Mine is much like a rattle trap.
The only thing, I think from like a quality standpoint, and already the AK guys will for once probably actually be relatively happy to me. I prefer the finish on the M70 as far as it being like, it's like, not parkerized, but like blued almost is kind of the finish. It's a little more reflective, but it like looks and feels nicer is the best way I can describe it. This reminds me a lot of parkerized stuff. So a lot of mil-spec rifles have parkerization if you go back to a lot of the older guns. It is a more matte finish, but specifically on the bolt, I feel like the bolt has
a rougher way of it as far as when you travel it. When you rack that versus racking the M70, and that's a polished bolt, you'll just notice that it does feel smoother on the M70, despite this being a heavier gun. The only not fair thing is, and typically what you do to smooth out an AK is you shoot it. That one's got probably north of almost 2,000 rounds through it versus this one's within its first 1,000. Accuracy, you noticed it in shooting it fast, but shooting it slow, the trigger made a way bigger difference. And we took it out to 100. We did have like trigger slap, I guess the best way I could describe it. It's not like pinching. You'll get this with pistols where if you ride the trigger a little too low, it'll pinch like your index finger on the trigger guard. This is, it would like slap. It was almost like pushing back out.
Like the reset of the trigger was like pushing your finger forward a little bit. I didn't really notice it shooting it fast. It was like whenever I was taking shots, like very deliberate, slow, accurate shots, and I was like riding my trigger. But that being said, I like this trigger like way more than most mil-spec AKs. This is very nice compared to like what a mil-spec, at least my Egyptian Matty or even the M70, which is just basically a rolling trigger that has no wall. You pull and eventually it's going to go bang.
What I noticed on the reset, just kind of going back to that, is it feels like you let it out just a little bit to a certain point, then it just releases and springs forward, and it kind of like slaps your finger. So yes, when you're releasing it slow, you're going to feel it every time.
Yep.
But when you're rowing through the trigger real fast, it's not an issue.
Yeah, versus, like, and for those of you unfamiliar with, when it rolls, there is practically no, there is a reset, like it's there and you can kind of hear it, but it just kind of, I'm pretty sure I'm far enough and you'll come back and it'll go back off. But it's just a very odd thing coming from ARs or even pistols and stuff like that. Glocks have better resets than AKs do as
This
far as
is the
triggers.
first AK in a while I can remember where there was actually like a defined wall. Like it feels like a two-stage trigger. Like you pull it, you feel the wall, and then boom, which makes it for much easier like to get accurate shots.
And then really loading it was probably, if I was going to run this gun as my primary gun, which means I'm running drills or I'm running competitions, it was the biggest disparity between performance. One, the little tab to unload it, which is probably for AK guys less of a thing or less of an issue because they're used to reaching for it. But the magwell itself,
oh yeah,
it was
It's definitely an oversized mag release compared to like standard like mil-spec AKs.
Yeah.
Usually it's like a third that size. On a standard AK, instead of having like an actual mag well, you just have dimples. Depending on if it's a milled or a stamped receiver, you have like little dimples here on the side to guide your mag in. But this, like after we sat there and did like 5 or 6 drills or basically inserting, dropping the mag, it's just like, it's so easy. It's so hard to actually miss this, where like on a regular AK or the M70, it's really easy to kind of overshoot the little lip in there and get like not get the mag in. This was significantly easier.
When we were doing those drills, we had, I think, 5 different types of magazines we were using, and it didn't matter which magazine you had. It was the same action every time because there's enough tolerance there where you send it home, it would lock in. Whereas with the M70, there were moments.
I had a couple of 60-second runs purely on reload.
Yeah.
The biggest thing for me is probably the muzzle device. Suppressors, especially with wait times being shortened, have been a really big deal. And there's only like a handful of companies that make adapters that'll allow for your standard thread pitch on standard AK barrels to be, and it's like a weird like left hand.
Because this is 5/8 by 24, so it's you don't have to have like any kind of weird adapter like you would normally have to have in AKs. And also suppressed AKs are
Are they as cool as trains?
they're pretty cool.
There was one thing we did notice when we were shooting it a lot pretty quickly was it heated up a lot faster than the M70 did. The heat was definitely noticeable, and depending on how you grip it, if you're getting on top of that rail, it's going to let you know after 3 or 4 magazines versus keeping your thumb to the side. It's not as much a problem, but you can feel the heat.
But that's kind of my big takeaways. Everything else we kind of covered before, and it's a compelling argument. I normally, when I see guns like this, I'm always like, cool, you know, it's another plastic semi-automatic 9mm handgun, like, or something, whatever. This is actually a pretty cool addition to the platform, and I think it does serve people that are AK curious that are coming from ARs. And you and I were on the phone with Century talking to them about that. This was an AK for AR guys. Was their push. I think more subjectively, for those of us who were being asked our opinion on the thing, I think it's actually more for AK guys that want the toys, if that makes any sense. I think the guys that want an easier and better way to get a suppressor on their gun, maybe they're trying to get into night vision. So I think that's really more who this is aimed towards. I think people who want to use an AK in a more professional setting, or AK guys that kind of want to maybe not get made fun of by their one MOA brothers. Really, I think the trigger. I think is a no-brainer for anybody that already owns
The
an
trigger
AK.
and the magwell are the big upgrades.
I would say all the creature comforts really of the gun is really like it is a shooter's AK. Like nothing about the AK platform really, like an AR just does it better if you go to like 3-gun competition, stuff like that. And this is starting to make a case. Like reload's still not going to be as fast, but everything except for the safety is almost on par with what the AR guys are doing. So it's just much better.
So this is the MB47 from Century Arms. It is a really cool addition to the AK family of rifles. If you guys are interested, go check it out. Most of these parts are available either through Century Arms or through SharpsBros. So if you're going to do your own build for it, you're probably capable of doing most of that yourself. And then if you want any more information like that, you're going to have a probably cooler video on this than we do.
I don't know about that. I don't know that I can top trains.
Check out the Humble Marksman. He was the one that let us borrow this rifle for the review, so we want to thank him and his fatherly leadership. So go check it out. We have links in the description below for our Discord if you're curious about getting into that stuff. And then if you really want to, you can go to superiorrifle.com and you can go get into the forums if you want to make arguments there, or put it in the comment section below. Until next time, thanks for hanging out with us. We will see you guys at our next range trip.